What is up, hockey fans? Welcome to the Wraparound, brought to you by the Hockey News and presented by Sticks.com. I am your host, Emma Lingan. I'm joined today by Jake Tye and Adam Kierszenblat. We are here on draft day, but so much more to talk about before we even get to the draft, because my goodness, the wheeling and dealing has already begun. And we're going to get to all of that and more here in just a moment. But before we do want to remind you all that we are brought to you by our good friends at Sticks.com. Why break the bank on sticks when you can get pro level composite sticks without the pro price tag at Sticks.com? That's STIX.com. Head over now and gear up. Whew, all right. So the draft hasn't even started yet. The teams are not even there in person. And yet there's already all kinds of wheeling and dealing happening. We've got trades. Some trades might be happening as we speak. So we're going to keep an eye on that as well. But Adam, I'll start with you. I mean, we have talked about that this is the decentralized form, of the draft this year, a little bit different, kind of the way that they did it during the COVID year. But now just it's a little bit different. All of the teams, all of the war rooms are going to be spread out all over the continent. So we were maybe questioning before as to whether that would lead to maybe a downturn in the wheeling and dealing and the transaction making, since they won't be in person on the draft floor, but does not seem to be the case as of right now. Lots of trades already going down on the day of the draft, as well as some contract extensions. Anything that has jumped out at you? Any that have been particularly surprising to you of the moves that have happened so far?
Well, I think, the big one of the day so far that we can talk about is the Noah Dobson trade to Montreal. Like, that is a fantastic move because you essentially have your top pair now in Dobson and Lane Hudson for the next, 8 years, because Dobson is signing an extension with the Montreal Canadiens, and it was really good return. You get two mid-round draft picks that Islanders, it sounds like they're going to try, by the time this comes out, we'll probably already know what happened, but it sounds like they're going to try to get back into the top 5, top 6, because they want to bring James Haggins home. So that was, an interesting move. We talked about, or just right before we jumped on, the Charlie Coyle move to Columbus. What does that do for, Columbus? Are they going to start moving out players? Is that kind of securing a spot that they know that they're going to be active on the trade front, maybe acquiring some picks for players? So they have to bring in Coyle. And what does that mean for Colorado? Because you have Nelson and you have McKinnon, but who is your third, who is your fourth line center now? So yeah, a lot of wheeling and dealing. But I mean, the NFL draft does the decentralized, and we see a ton of moves in the NFL around the trade, around drafts and trades. So yeah, it might be a little bit more difficult to navigate trades when everybody's in their separate cities, but it doesn't seem to be slowing GMs down very much.
Jake, how much movement do you expect to see in the first round, especially of the draft? I mean, it seems like of course, the week leading up, the multiple weeks leading up to it, we hear all kinds of rumors about, the Islanders or whoever, this team, that team, are looking to trade up or trade down. But realistically, it's not something that happens a ton in the draft. But do you think this year is going to be different in that regard?
Yeah, I'm definitely thinking on the same path as Adam. I'm definitely thinking the Islanders are looking to move up there. And I've also heard the same about San Jose, maybe moving out of that 2 spot. And also Chicago obviously has been notable to move around. And same with Utah. Like, there's so many people around that top 4 trying to move around. And that's why I think it'll be easy kind of for the Islanders to come up with something that'll get it together. So I think we'll definitely see a couple bigger trades than we've already seen. And I think it's going to be a crazy night. Like, from what some people have said, it's going to be like the craziest draft in years. So I'm definitely excited to watch.
Yeah, even in that top 2, it seems like there's still some level of intrigue. It's not the very super clear number 1 and number 2. I mean, most people think it'll be Schaefer and Misa, but there's even some questioning that as well. So definitely an exciting draft this year. And speaking of draft. We keep hearing about the top prospects, the consensus number one, of course, Matthew Schaefer. Then you have Michael Misa, guys like Anton Frundell, um, and Porter Martone and James Hagens and like all of this sort of consensus top group there. But Adam, I'm curious if there are any names outside of that group who you think might be especially intriguing prospects or names that maybe you wouldn't be surprised to hear on night one.
Well, Brady Martin is the one that a lot of noise has started coming up about him going in the top 10. This is a gritty, big center. That's what teams look for. We look at guys like Sam Bennett, how he's done in the playoffs, Alexander Barkov. Like, these are the type of centers that you need to win. Martin is, one of these very difficult centers to play against out of the OHL. Like, he is one of the big risers for definitely the draft. And yeah, he's expected to go in the top 10. And then on defense, Radim Murtka is a name that really shot up draft boards this year. And the reason is because he moved from Czechia over to the WHL. So he got a little bit more exposure. This is a guy who is massive, around 6'6". He's a shutdown defenseman. He can produce offensively. He's a good playmaker, and he can transition the puck. So these are two names that, top 10, if not top 15, that have really started to shoot up draft boards going into these drafts. And two types of players that teams are always looking to their prospect pool. Like, we can talk about, the 5'10", 5'11" guys, but really teams want those 6'4", 6'5", 6'6" mobile players, especially at center and right defenseman. So those are two names definitely to watch in the top 15 of this year's draft.
Jake, do you agree? Do you think that the size factor, of course, it's always a factor, but do you think that the key metric of inches over 6 feet is going to really play as big of a role in this year's first round?
Yeah, I really like Adam mentioning Murtka because that's a guy that I could see so many teams liking because we just saw Florida dominate with their physical edge and Murtka's getting so many comparisons to somebody like Nikita Zadorov from Boston, who they just spent all that money going to get like Zadorov because they wanted that size, and Murtka's going to be a perfect comp for that for any team that wants to go out, get a big defenseman that can move bodies. And he's really good at, obviously, like we were saying, moving the puck and also shifting his body. Like, his mobility is just crazy for somebody his size, the insiders are saying. So yeah, he's going to be somebody I think will be interesting to see.
All right. Well, we've got lots of prospects that we're keeping an eye on as we head into draft weekend here. Of course, you've got the consensus top two, Michael Misa, Matthew Schaefer, of course, coming out of the CHL. Then you have some NCAA prospects in James Hagens, for example. Looking at this, sort of the landscape right now, Adam, I want to ask you, we've been seeing this already that players are leaving the CHL in all three leagues within the CHL because of the rule changes that have allowed them now to play in the NCAA starting in the 2025-26 season. So how much, with this being the last year, before that rule takes effect, how much do you think that's going to shift the landscape of junior hockey starting next season and therefore, how players get drafted?
Well, I can tell you just from the WHL perspective, there's a lot of owners, GMs that are really concerned about this because we've already seen quite a few players depart the WHL early for NCAA. Jackson Smith, potential top 10 pick, Cole Reshny, a first rounder. These are guys who were projected to be stars in the WHL next year because they were this year and are now gone. So it's really shifted how GMs are looking at players. On the flip side, you have players that have already committed to the NCAA who are now eligible to come in and play for the teams in the WHL. Aiden Park is an example for Calgary, the Calgary Hitmen. We'll see exactly what he does next year, but this is a guy who is already NCAA committed and got a chance to play for the Hitmen during the playoffs because of this new rule. So it is really a give and take. I can tell you, just talking to some GMs, coaches, they're really trying to figure this out, and they're trying to see how they're going to build their teams in the future, because now where you could possibly build your teams 2-3 years down the line, it's going to be more of a year-to-year take, and ensuring that you have, a strong prospect pool of 16-year-olds, so that you can have at least 3 years of them before they move over to the NCAA. So I can tell you that, and that there's a lot of concern at the moment. This is not going to be a short-term fix for CHL teams. This is going to be like a 4 or 5 year until kind of they figure out how this is going to really, how to kind of get back to normal, and how to kind of deal with this, because it's very complicated. So there are players who are going to stick in the CHL regardless. Like we've already heard, like Carter Bear is an example. He wants to play in the WHL. Like there are players who are, I'm going to stay in the WHL because I want to play for this insert team here, hometown team, whatever reason. So it's going to be very interesting to see kind of how this landscape changes and what type of league the CHL turns into because of this NCAA rule.
Absolutely. Jake, I'm curious, Adam just laid out for us that this is clearly not an easy fix here for the CHL. But in your opinion, is there anything that the league can do to try to keep top talent there? Like Adam said, there's still some players who are committed to staying there, but anything the CHL can do to sort of sweeten the pot and convince some of the top talent, to that playing there is better than playing in the NCAA?
Yeah, like it's going to be really curious to see like kind of how talent moves around, especially because, you can go to universities like Michigan and Michigan State, and, they're going to have CHL guys go there. And then you can tell them, hey, like we have room here in the CHL where you can get, a pro season. You can play a certain amount of games that you're not going to play at university. You're obviously not going to get NIL money and all the perks of university, stuff like that. But, you're going to be able to play in a more pro style system where you're going to be able to develop. And even teams that have notable alumni like the London Knights and Erie Otters, like if I was them, I'd be bringing in people like McDavid for Erie, or obviously all the people from London. London produces so many, talented players where you could just be like, look at all these guys, look at how they developed in our system. I think this is how you guys are going to be better suited off, rather than going to some, system in Michigan where you're not really going to be a top priority there.
Yeah, definitely going to be interesting to see how this all shakes out at the junior level and the amateur level. But for now, let's go back to the aforementioned wheeling and dealing that has already begun before the draft kicks off Friday night. So let's start in Toronto. The Maple Leafs have extended John Tavares. Not a huge surprise there. It seems that it was clear the interest was mutual in him coming back. He has re-signed 4-year deal at a $4.38 million AAV. Now, he has since admitted that he left money on the table. He gave Toronto the hometown discount to take a little bit less money to stay with his hometown team, and believes that he can that they can win there. So, Adam, what do you think of the deal? Do you think that it's fair? Do you think it's about what you expected? And how likely is it that we're going to see other players following suit and offering themselves at a discount here?
Well, I agree that Tavares probably left money on the table. Like the fact that he's not even getting 4.5 million is I thought that it was going to come in closer to 6, because that's kind of where he where he would probably line up. But this is a deal that in the final year of his contract, it's going to be probably the equivalent of a $2 million deal now, because of how the cap is going up. Like, this is a massive win for the Toronto Maple Leafs. They get a player who can still produce 70 to 80 points, probably in that, as he gets older, we might see a little bit of a decrease, but, around that 30 goal range. He's obviously a leader in that dressing room, even though they did change over the seat of Matthews, but this is a guy who wants to be there. What I'm interested to see is this going to be a trend with some of the older players who maybe want to stay at home? Like the next big one is Claude Giroux. Does Claude Giroux look at this contract and say, listen, Tavares left money on the table so that Toronto could build. So I'm going to do the same thing in Ottawa. We saw it with Matt Duchene in Dallas, Jamie Benn, the rumored extension there. Like, it seems that the older players who have been around for quite a while and want to stay in their hometown or what's developed in their hometown are willing to take a discount. I don't think it's going to affect the younger players, like the 27, 28-year-olds who are cashing in big on their big contract. But, when you're 35 and you want to play somewhere, why? I understand 100%. Now, the big question is, does this impact what Sam Bennett or Aaron Ekblad signs in Florida? Because we know that both of those guys can get massive deals on the open market. So I think those two will be the real determining of if we're seeing a kind of a attempt to build super teams like the NBA, or if this is just kind of like a one-off Tavares saying, I'll take the discount just because I want to stay here.
Yeah, Jake, how much pressure do you think this puts on the Leafs now that they, obviously it's presumed Marner is gone. They've now gotten Tavares back, but, that's with sort of that good faith agreement that, hey, I'm going to take a little bit less money so that you guys can build a strong team and we can go win this thing. How much pressure does that put on Toronto in the immediate term?
Yeah, I think it definitely puts on a lot because now especially you're going to be looking at, oh, okay, now he took less. Now we got more to offer Matthew Knies because obviously we're hearing from a couple different sources around the league that he's going to be, him and his camp are pushing for offer sheets. So I think it was actually a really good move by Tavares to kind of give the franchise a little bit more money just in case Toronto's kind of scrambling with, oh, somebody's offering him $10 million a season. Do we want to offer him that much? Well, we have the ability to. Or if we do lose Knies, now we have some extra money that we can go out and make some moves. And I think it's going to be really telling, obviously, this offseason, who they're going to be able to go out and get to replace Marner. And with Sam Bennett off the table, having, a couple million off of Tavares's, hometown discount, that's going to help them get, some bigger players like maybe Ehlers or Brock Besser. It's going to be really pivotal to see what they do with that extra money.
All right. Well, that's a great segue that you brought up Matthew Knies, because I want to talk about him for a second. Like you mentioned, he and his camp are reportedly pushing their negotiations into that offer sheet phase. So again, another source of pressure here for the Leafs. They now have to make sure that they have enough cap space to match a potential offer sheet that Knies may get. So Adam, I'll go to you first. Do you think that how much space do you think that's going to be? How much do you think Toronto is going to need to make sure that they have to match a potential offer sheet for Matthew Knies? And at what point, what's the point where they walk away and say, okay, this is too much?
Well, if somebody wants to throw, over 10 million at Matthew Knies, I think you just take the 4 first overall or first round picks. Like, that seems like an easy decision, but we'll see exactly. I have no idea how the draft compensation or how the offer sheets are going to work, because we've seen in the past a couple teams do like right underneath a certain tier. So maybe they go, like $1 or $2 under that to make it that third tier where they're not giving up, 3 or 4 first round picks. And it all depends. Like, Toronto could easily match, but you also have to look into kind of the future, like how these deals are going to play out, with the rising cap. So it might not be a bad idea to sign him for 8-9 million, because that will be, only about 6 million in today's dollars or cap percentage in the future. And also you have to look at what's going to happen with Austin Matthews in a couple years, because he only signed for 4 years in Toronto. That's going to be a big ticket. There's hope in the Toronto fan base that they go after some big name Ontario potential free agents next year. So, this is not just a kind of a 1 year situation where you're looking at, like, if you sign Knives to $8, $9, $10 million, you have to have an eye for the future, because there are some players that are going to need big raises coming up. And if you want to keep building that team and potentially have a chance at some of these big name free agents, you have to leave a little bit of space for the future as well.
Jake, what do you think? I mean, I think you've got on that roster maybe some contracts you can dump if you need to, guys like Max Domi and whatnot. Not that you're necessarily looking to offload those if you're Toronto, but if push comes to shove, they could. What do you think is going to be the most likely outcome here with Knies? Do you think he ends up signing a long term extension? Is it going to be more of an Austin Matthews type? Not a bridge deal, but not super long term. What do you think is going to happen here?
Yeah, I think it's going to be in that neighborhood of kind of in between a longer deal and a bridge, especially with, like Adam was saying, like we're going to see obviously a big expansion with how every team's going to get a bigger cap space and stuff like that. So I feel like every player is going to be looking for, okay, maybe I'll push to maybe 4 or 5 years rather than 6 or 7 because I can potentially make 2 or 3 more million every time I sign here. So I think it's going to be interesting to see, especially with contracts like Matthews and upcoming McDavid. Like those guys could be signing for 19, 20 million every season, and it's like they're going to do this because they can. So how are we getting prepared to sign that big of a deal?
Yeah, definitely going to be interesting to see what goes on here. I want to go back. We mentioned it earlier in the show, but I want to spend a little bit more time on it. This Noah Dobson trade. His name had been floating around quite a bit, but I think it seemed like, well, the Islanders are going to keep him because he's a part of their future core, and then it seems like the dominoes all started to fall very, very quickly towards the end, leading up to the draft here. So, we talked about the potential impact for the Canadiens. Now they've got this, they've got their deed just kind of set up here. They've got Lane Hudson, they've got Dobson. How much do you think this moves the needle for Montreal when it comes to, obviously they were a playoff team this past season, but how much do you think this kind of like further launches them into that long-term contender space, Adam, in your opinion?
Well, I think that, you have to build from the goaltender out, and that's really where we've seen the successful teams thrive. So, how much faith do they have in Sam Montembeault? That's the big question. Like, he's been good. Can he be a elite starter at the NHL level? Now you have a strong D-core. Will they start to move out some of their prospects maybe to enhance their floor of their D-core? So, bringing in a solid 5-6, just kind of pushing the floor up, maybe not ceiling players, but just players that can push the floor a little bit higher. And then up front, this is a team that has tons of talent, whether that is Slavkovsky, guys like Cole Caulfield, Nick Suzuki. We'll see what happens with Patrick Laine. There's talk that that's a name that could be moved at the draft for additional prospects or even players. Like even a guy like Brendan Gallagher, that's somebody who brings a lot of leadership and, that grittiness that they need during the playoffs. So I think that they're in a tough division because obviously they're facing off against the Stanley Cup, the 2-time Stanley Cup champions. Tampa Bay, is still Tampa Bay. You got Toronto. Ottawa's going to make another push. So this is their time. They're a young team, but they're a team that definitely has a lot of potential. And I think that, this Noah Dobson pushes them in the right direction. He's definitely a ceiling player. So he pushes that ceiling a little bit, but now it's about rounding out that roster and making them even stronger, pushing the floor up a little bit more.
Jake, how much do you think this really sort of changes the landscape of the Atlantic Division, the way Adam was talking about? I mean, looking at now you've got this, it was before the Canadiens were sort of this scrappy, young, up and coming team on the rise, and now they've arrived, and they've made that very clear. So how much pressure do you think that puts on the rest of the division, much less the rest of the league?
I think it's going to be brutal for Maple Leaf fans for a couple more decades, especially they just got whooped by Tampa Bay for a decade. Now Florida. Now it looks like their closest rival is going to be up there too as a contender, and it's just going to be brutal for the Maple Leaf fans to have to keep going through these. Oh man, how can we not get past this second round when we're playing against Stanley Cup contenders every year? And it definitely looks like Montreal's headed that way. Like especially what Adam said, like their defense is just going to be ridiculous with Dobson, Gooley, Hudson. Like, it's just going to be crazy. And like, they only need to make kind of a couple moves to solidify maybe like their bottom six. And then, they're a team that's going to be up there with the Floridas, the Tampas, and even, they're going to be kind of limiting Detroit now because Detroit's going to be kind of on the outside looking in. So it's going to be really tight. It's going to tighten things up. And we might see next season that both the Eastern wildcard teams are going to be both from the Atlantic.
And that's just good for hockey. It's good to get those rivalries going again. It's more fun, I feel like, when both of those teams are good. All right, one other contract extension that we saw get done on Friday, into the morning on Friday, was Trent Frederic in Edmonton. So 8 years, $3.85 million AAV. It's quite a hefty payday for a player, a bottom six player who's only been with the Oilers since the trade deadline. So they haven't had a huge amount of time to really get eyes on him, but pretty low AAV there, as I mentioned. Adam, do you think this is a good bet on this player, or do you think that the term of 8 years is just too risky for a bottom six forward like this?
Well, I think the term is risky just because of his injury history. Like, this is a player who, when he got to Edmonton, we didn't know if he was even going to play, like, in the playoffs. That was what the initial, conversation was. Like, this is one of those contracts where you can already tell that it's going to be an LTIR contract in year 7 and 8 probably, or even, like, I don't see it as a buyout contract because the cap hit is going to be so low in year 6, 7, 8. Like, but I mean, I guess Edmonton really likes him. They've only had him for a couple months, but I'm always a little bit, when you sign the guys like Trent Frederic, who are a little bit older, play a bottom six role for 8 years. That's a very interesting risk that you're taking, because yeah, he can probably play that type of role for the next 8 years, but is his body going to hold up? Things like that. So anytime you sign really a player over for more than 5 years, it's risky. But I don't 100% understand this deal from Edmonton's perspective, but I guess that this is a guy that they have a lot of faith in because he's going to be there for close to a decade now.
Yeah, I mean, I think good for him getting his bag while he can, but I agree. It seemed a little lengthy, little bit of a hefty payday. Jake, what do you think about that contract?
Yeah, he's definitely got a good agent that can keep him in town for that long, especially considering like if you look at his numbers, he gets roughly 30 to 40 points, which is kind of a role that he would actually be really good on Montreal. Like, they kind of need a bottom six forward like that. But like, even on Edmonton, like, he didn't play in the playoffs. He didn't play meaningful like penalty kill minutes like a typical bottom six would. He didn't obviously score that much. Like, he kind of just is limited in everything that he's trying to do. And I guess it's going to be telling to see if Connor Brown leaves Edmonton, because maybe you can move Frederic into that role of, okay, now you're killing penalties. Now you're, a third line guy that can move up to the second line when you need to. I think it's going to be kind of telling in those early games next season, kind of what his role is going to be, and if it's going to be like an overpay or if it's going to be right on the mark. But I guess we're going to have to see. Time will tell with Frederic.
All right. Well, want to wrap up today's discussion with the new CBA. Apparently, they have reached an agreement, the NHL and the Players Association, on an extension of the current CBA. Some pretty significant updates here, I think. We've got things like the 84 game regular season, which I, for one, am all in favor of because it comes with a shorter preseason. I've been a long time advocate for that. But also got like some other interesting things there, like full-time e-bugs and dress codes and player contract lengths. I mean, it's now looking like the contract lengths are going to limit from 8 years to 7 years for a max contract, or 6 years in free agency. So, Adam, I'm curious of any of the sort of items that I've mentioned, or anything else in the new CBA, anything kind of stand out to you that you think is a really good idea or maybe a really bad idea?
Well, the 84 games, we'll see exactly how that works. Some people already think that the NHL season is too long. So we'll just see. Like, that seems like we're also going to have to adjust our expectations on statistics with 2 extra games, like, and comparing eras. So that's going to be interesting to see how we do that over the next decade. But I mean, the cool one is that teams can't enforce the dress code anymore. So now we really get to see, NHL players go full style, like, show really their personality. And I think that's kind of what's missing from the NHL. Like, there's a lot of, like, NHL players are good at, interviews and kind of being really personable, but at the same time, some of them are very dry. And I don't think so. Now you get that opportunity for players to really express themselves. Like, we see it in the NBA, like what players are, or in the NFL, like look at how many views videos of players walking in get at the NBA and NFL level. Like, that's what the NHL needs. They need to have something that allows, people who maybe aren't the biggest hockey fans a way to connect to the league. And I think that allowing players to kind of dress the way they want and show some personality is going to help them in the overall view and overall marketability of the NHL.
That is true. Could always use some more personality there. I do think, though, you're going to run the risk now of seeing guys show how little fashion sense they may have when they start showing up. You start to see which guys really have that eye for fashion and which ones don't. I think. I, for one, am a little bit sad about the full-time e-bug situation. I think it's fun always having the possibility that a Zamboni driver or a tax accountant gets to jump into a NHL game and play goalie. Not that it happens a lot, but Jake, your thoughts on any of these potential changes and any that you have any particularly strong feelings about?
I was really curious to hear about the playoff salary cap, kind of with like lineups and stuff in the playoffs. Like, I think that's going to really cut off teams that are using the long term IR, and now like we're seeing it like every year where the NHL is investigating like Evander Kane, Tyler Seguin this past offseason. Like, I think it's really going to make managers really have to work to make smart roster moves, to move guys in and out of the lineup that are actually going to fit within that salary cap. And it's going to be, I think, interesting also too at like the trade deadline, for example, where you're going to trade for a guy, but you're also going to maybe not have enough money. So you're going to be forced to have to kind of make more maneuvers. I think it's just going to be harder on the management, but it's going to be good because then fans can't complain, oh, they're 8 million over and we're not. So, how are we supposed to do this? And I think it's going to be interesting, especially. And I think like even the last couple of years, I think like 8 years, the Stanley Cup winner has been over the cap. So I think it's definitely gonna even the odds for everybody.
Yeah, well, to your earlier point, I still think that NHL fans, if they can't complain about that, they'll find something else to complain about. But I agree, this will be an interesting twist here. With all of the cap gymnastics that have been going on around the playoffs, especially over the last few years. But before any more news breaks, we are just going to go ahead and end our conversation here and come back next week with all of the latest news from the draft, trades, and free agency and everything surrounding the draft. We're going to have so much to talk about next week. So make sure you tune back in and join us for the wraparound on Monday. For now, however, that's going to do it for today's show. I want to thank Stix.com again for sponsoring us. Thank you again to my wonderful guests today on this Friday Draft Day show. For Jake Tye and Adam Kierszenblat, I'm Emma Lingan. This is the Wraparound, and we will see you next week.